The sound of distant moans carried on the wind like a haunting lullaby. Behind a wall of stacked cars, metal sheets, and barbed wire, a pocket of survivors clung to life in what remained of their city. They called it Safe Zone Delta, but there was nothing truly safe about it, just less dangerous. It had been 3 years since the outbreak. 3 years since society fell and the infected ruled the world beyond the barricades. Elena Costa, a former paramedic turned reluctant leader, stood on the makeshift watchtower gripping her binoculars. Her sharp eyes scanned the tree line beyond the abandoned freeway where movement had been reported the night before. Most of the time, it was just deer. Sometimes, it wasn't. Below her, the camp slowly stirred to life. Children fetched water under their parents' watchful eyes. Guards rotated shifts. Engineers tinkered with salvaged solar panels. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like humanity was rebuilding. But Elena knew better. Supplies were dwindling. Morale was cracking. And yesterday, one of their scouts, Malik, hadn't returned. Behind her, footsteps crunched over gravel. It was Theo, the group's mechanic and Elena's oldest friend in the camp. He held a folded piece of paper, face tense. Elena. This was on the gate this morning. She took the paper, eyebrows narrowing. The handwriting was clean. Too clean. Most of the infected couldn't write. Most survivors didn't dare come close enough to leave a note. We found sanctuary beyond the ridge. Follow the red flags. Hope lives. Elena stared at the note. Something about it didn't sit right. But she couldn't deny what it sparked in people: whispers, hope, a flicker of belief that somewhere beyond the rot and ruin, life still thrived. By midday, a small meeting gathered in the central tent. Theo, Anna, a schoolteacher who'd become the group's moral compass, Jonas, their best shot, and a few volunteers sat around a dented metal table. It could be a trap, Jonas muttered. We've all heard the stories, groups pretending to offer safety just to lure survivors into slave camps, or worse. But what if it's real? Anna countered. We're running out of antibiotics. The last shipment from Sector 9 never came. Our kids need food. We need clean water. We can't survive here much longer. Elena stayed quiet, then finally said, we don't all go. Just a team. Scout it out, verify. If it's fake, we come back. If it's real, we organize an evacuation. The team agreed. At dawn, the recon team would leave. Elena, Jonas, Malik's younger brother Dev, and a quiet woman named Ray who never spoke of her past but was lethal with a blade. The next morning, as the camp watched silently, the force slipped through the east gate, weapons ready, eyes sharp. Red flags, just like the note said, fluttered in the breeze, tied to broken trees, rusted signs, even the mirror of an overturned truck. Hours passed as they made their way across the overgrown freeway, stepping over vines and cracked pavement. Every sound put them on edge. Birds scattered once, sending Jonas's finger to the trigger. Then they found it. A narrow road that wound upward toward the ridge. The red flags ended there. Instead, painted on a large slab of stone was a single word in black: welcome. Ray knelt beside it. Too clean. No dirt. Someone's maintaining this. Suddenly, Dev motioned everyone down. In the distance, a flicker of light, movement. A figure stood at the ridge's edge, watching them. It's not infected, Jonas whispered. Too still. Then why are they standing alone in the open? Elena replied, voice tight. The figure turned. For a second, it looked like they were beckoning. Then, gunfire. Sharp, precise, and not aimed at them. The figure collapsed. Everyone froze. What just happened? Dev whispered. But before anyone could answer, from the woods beside them came a sound none of them expected: laughter. Slow, mocking, human, but wrong. And then, a voice echoed from the trees, deep and smooth like velvet soaked in poison. Beyond the barricades, you came looking for hope. A pause. Then, But you brought dinner instead. The laughter echoed again, unnatural in the still air. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as her eyes scanned the trees, searching for the source. The sound wasn't just eerie, it was chilling, like it knew something they didn't. The figure that had been shot lay still, blood staining the dirt beneath it, but now there was no time to mourn. The voice had spoken to them with a chilling confidence, one that felt far too comfortable for their dangerous world. "Get down!" Elena hissed, pulling the others into a crouch behind the overgrown ruins of a rusted truck. Her mind raced. They hadn't come this far just to be ambushed by some unknown enemy. She had a sinking feeling that the people behind this trap weren't just survivors like them. There was something else at play here. Something far worse. Jonas's grip tightened around his rifle, eyes darting between the trees. "Who the hell was that?" he muttered. His finger hovered nervously over the trigger. Before Elena could answer, Dev's voice cut through the tension. "There's movement. Over there," he pointed to the left, where a silhouette flashed through the underbrush. It was fast, too fast, and Elena's gut twisted as she realized it wasn't the movement of a normal human being. Whatever was lurking in those woods had been waiting for them. Ray, always the quiet one, moved with purpose, her hands moving to her sidearm. She didn't need to speak to convey her readiness, and Elena knew that Ray's silence meant only one thing: she was prepared for whatever was coming next. The woods were alive with the sounds of shifting leaves and snapping branches. Elena's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when hope was so close, even if it was tainted by the nightmare that awaited beyond the barricades. "We need to move, now," Elena whispered urgently. "They're circling us. Get ready to run." But before they could make a move, the voice returned, closer this time. "Running won't save you. It's too late for that." The words sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Whoever these people, or things, were, they knew exactly what they were dealing with. They knew the fear of the survivors. They knew how to play it, how to trap them. "Stay sharp," Elena said, pulling out her knife. "No one gets separated." Jonas nodded, his eyes darting to the ridge. "We can still make it to the ridge," he said, determination in his voice. "Get to high ground, figure out what's going on. But we move fast." Just as they started to rise, a sharp whistle sliced through the air. The sound wasn't normal, more like a command, a signal. And then, from the trees, shadows began to emerge. At first, it was just one. Then two. Then a dozen. Figures cloaked in dark, tattered clothes, moving with an unsettling fluidity. Their eyes gleamed with unnatural light, and their faces were covered, but not by masks. Elena could see it now. The things that stood before them were human, or had once been. But they weren't anymore. These were people who had been twisted by the world outside the barricades. Mutated, perhaps, by the virus, or something worse. The infected she'd seen before were mindless, ravenous. These beings, however, had intelligence, and cruelty. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice deep and hollow as he spoke. "You thought the world ended with the barricades? No. It was only the beginning. Welcome to the Hollow. Your new home, if you choose to stay. But the price of entry is steep." Elena's breath caught in her throat as the group of twisted survivors closed in, their eyes locked on her teen with hunger. "We don't want trouble," Elena said, her voice steady despite the rising panic. "We're just passing through. We're looking for answers. A place to live." The leader smirked, his teeth too white, too perfect for a world that had long stopped caring about survival. "Answers? You'll find nothing but the truth of your world here." He gestured toward the woods, where more shapes moved, shadows of death and desperation. "Look around, survivor," he continued. "This is the reality beyond the barricades. A world where the strong survive, and the weak become prey." In the blink of an eye, a shape lunged at them, fast and silent like a shadow, and the battle for survival erupted. Dev barely had time to react before a figure was upon him, its hands like claws, slashing at his arms. The others opened fire, the crack of gunshots ringing through the trees. But the attackers moved with terrifying speed, dodging the bullets as if they had anticipated every move. Ray was the first to strike back, her blade flashing as she took down one of the attackers with brutal precision. But there were too many, closing in from all sides. "Fall back!" Elena shouted, grabbing Dev and pulling him toward the cover of the ruins. "Get to the ridge, now!" Jonas and Ray covered their retreat, firing as they went, but Elena knew they couldn't outrun the mutants. They had to fight, and fast. "Hope doesn't come for free," the leader called out, his grin widening. "And neither does survival." The bullets echoed through the dense trees, but Elena's mind wasn't on the sounds, they were background noise to the chaos unfolding around them. Dev, bleeding from a deep gash on his arm, struggled to keep pace as she dragged him behind the wrecked truck. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and his eyes were wide with shock. "Stay with me," Elena hissed, her voice tight with urgency. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the sharp tang of blood, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in every corner of this hellish world. Jonas and Ray fought to cover them, their shots ringing out with deadly precision. Ray's blade flashed again as she took down another of the attackers with a swift strike to the neck, but it didn't take long before two more emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The sound of their feet hitting the forest floor was like thunder, heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly fast. "They won't stop coming," Jonas shouted, his voice strained with frustration. "We need to get out of here now." But Elena knew they couldn't retreat forever. They had to fight back, and they had to do it smart. "Keep moving," she yelled. "To the ridge." With one last look behind her, she turned and pulled Dev into a sprint, despite his injuries. The ridge wasn't far now, but every step felt like a mile. The ground was uneven, and the forest thickened around them, its twisted branches reaching down like fingers, threatening to pull them under. The air was dense with the scent of damp earth and decay, but Elena barely noticed. Every part of her focus was on getting to the top of that ridge. "Get to high ground," she shouted again, her voice hoarse from the effort. She could hear Jonas and Ray behind her, still firing as they ran. But as they neared the ridge, the first wave of attackers was already there, emerging from the trees like predatory phantoms. They were faster than anything Elena had seen before, far faster than the infected they had encountered earlier. One of the mutants, its face half covered by a cloth, lunged at Elena, its speed nearly impossible to follow. She barely dodged the swipe of its claws as it tore through the air beside her. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't falter. With a quick, fluid motion, she spun and shoved her knife deep into its chest. The creature screeched in pain, but it didn't die. Instead, it seemed to melt back into the shadows, retreating with an unnatural swiftness. "Not normal," Ray muttered under her breath as she sliced through another attacker. "These aren't just infected. There's something else." Elena nodded, her jaw clenched. She had suspected it since the moment they saw the red flags. This was no ordinary survival group. They had crossed into something much darker, something more dangerous than just another gang of raiders. "We have to hold them off until we reach the ridge," Jonas shouted as he reloaded, his eyes never leaving the oncoming wave of attackers. Elena, her heart pounding, looked up toward the rocky rise. The ridge was their only hope now. But the mutants were closing in, their eyes burning with hunger. Every fiber of her being screamed for escape, but there was no turning back. Not now. A loud crack rang out from above them, followed by a burst of dust and rocks. Elena stumbled backward, startled, but when she looked up, she saw something that made her heart leap, an opening in the ridge. A cave. "Over there," she shouted, pointing toward the cave. "We can make it to cover." The group surged forward, pushing past the mutants as they desperately fought to stay alive. Dev, who was barely able to keep up, stumbled, but Ray caught him just in time, lifting him with surprising strength and urgency. With one last push, they reached the cave entrance. Elena ducked inside, pulling Devin with her. Jonas and Ray followed closely behind, and as the last of the survivors squeezed through the narrow opening, the sound of claws scraping against stone echoed from outside. The mutants had stopped at the cave entrance, their forms barely visible in the dim light outside. The one with the half-covered face stepped forward, its eyes glinting with malicious intelligence. "You can hide for now," the leader's voice echoed from outside, calm and eerie. "But you'll never escape the hollow." Elena's breath caught in her throat as she pressed her back against the cold stone, trying to steady her nerves. There was something unnerving about the way he spoke, as if this was all part of a larger game, one they were trapped in. But there was no time to process it now. They were safe, for the moment. Jonas was the first to speak. "What the hell are these things?" "We need answers," Ray added, her voice grim. "This place is a nightmare." Elena looked around the cave, her mind racing. The echoes of the mutants' laughter still rang in her ears. The note, the red flags, the cave, it was all too orchestrated. But why? And what was the true nature of the hollow? Was it a sanctuary, or something far worse? "We'll find out," Elena said, her voice firm with determination. "But first, we need to rest. Tomorrow, we push forward. No matter what we face." The cave was a cold, oppressive place. The walls were rough, their jagged edges scraping against Elena's back as she sat with her team, trying to catch her breath. The muffled sounds of the mutants outside, their whispers, their eerie laughter, echoed through the stone like a haunting lullaby. It was enough to make anyone lose their nerve. Elena refused to let fear take hold. They'd survived worse. But the question kept nagging at her, what was the hollow? Was it a sanctuary, or was it a prison for those unlucky enough to stumble into it? Dev, still holding his bleeding arm, leaned back against the wall, his face pale but determined. "What now?" he asked, his voice strained from pain. Elena glanced at him, then at Jonas and Ray. "We rest. We need to figure out what this place really is, and we can't do that if we're all exhausted and half dead." Ray, ever the skeptic, frowned. "You really think it's safe to stay here? Those things, whatever they are, they know we're here. And they're not going to stop until they get us." Jonas nodded. "Ray's right. We should keep moving, find a better place to lay low." Elena shook her head, her resolve hardening. "If we move now, we'll be dead before we make it anywhere. We stay here for tonight, regroup, and then figure out our next move in the morning. We can't afford to make rash decisions." They all fell silent, the weight of the situation settling over them like a thick fog. It wasn't the fear of the mutants outside that kept Elena awake, though. It was the nagging feeling that there was something much worse waiting for them in the hollow. Whatever it wasn't just about survival anymore. There was something darker, something far more insidious, at play. Elena took a deep breath and wiped the sweat from her brow. "We need to be careful. Whatever these things are, they're organized. They're not the random monsters we've seen before. Someone or something is controlling them." Ray's voice broke the silence. "You think they're humans? Like us?" Elena paused, considering. "Maybe. Or maybe they're something else entirely. But I don't think they're just survivors like us. The way they move, the way they work together," she trailed off, trying to put it into words. "It's like they're hunting us, not just for food, but for something more." "Or maybe they are the food," Dev muttered darkly, his eyes dark as he looked at his injury. "We've seen how bad it can get out here. The question is, how much worse could it be?" They sat in silence for a few moments longer. The sound of scratching at the entrance to the cave reminded them they weren't alone, but for the moment, they were safe. It didn't last long. Suddenly, a faint flickering light appeared on the horizon, a flash of movement through the trees just beyond the cave entrance. It was too far away to tell what it was, but it wasn't the mutants. The figures outside were silent now, lurking, waiting. Whoever had made that light was far too careless for their enemies to be nearby. "Look," Jonas said, pointing toward the flickering light. "That doesn't look like one of them." Ray squinted into the distance. "Could be another survivor. But why would they be out there, so close to the mutants?" Elena's instincts were on high alert. "I don't know, but we can't afford to sit here and wait." We need to find out who they are, and if they're a threat, we'll deal with it. Jonas pulled his rifle close. And if it's a trap? Elena didn't hesitate. Then we fight. But we have to know what we're dealing with before we make any decisions. They gathered their gear quickly, moving quietly through the shadows of the cave. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was about finding the truth of what lay behind the hollow. The air outside was damp and cool, the forest thick with the sounds of the night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made their hearts race. As they approached the source of the flickering light, it grew brighter. It wasn't a fire, but something more erratic, an electric glow, like a faulty lantern. The closer they got, the more Elena's unease grew. The mutants hadn't moved. They were still at the entrance to the cave, waiting. It didn't make sense. "Stay close," Elena whispered. "We don't know what this is yet." They crept forward, using the trees for cover as the light grew louder and clearer. And then, as they rounded a thick cluster of trees, they saw it. In the clearing ahead, a strange, makeshift camp had been set up. A small generator hummed softly, its power source a rare luxury in the post-apocalyptic world. Several figures were gathered around, talking in low voices. They weren't mutants. But they weren't exactly human, either. One of them turned, and Elena's stomach dropped as she saw the pale, hollow eyes staring back at her. They had found the Hollow's true inhabitants, those who had crossed the line between humanity and something darker. The figures in the clearing didn't seem to notice Elena and her team as they crouched low behind the trees. The dull hum of the generator filled the air, mixing with the strange murmurs of conversation. Elena's heart pounded, and every instinct screamed that something was horribly wrong. These people, whoever they were, didn't belong in this world. They were too calm, too composed. Elena motioned for the others to stay silent, her hand raised in a gesture for them to hold their position. She carefully stepped forward, her boots barely making a sound on the damp ground. Jonas, Ray, and Dev followed, but they were just as wary, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. As they approached the edge of the clearing, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The group gathered around the generator wasn't just any band of survivors. These people were pale, their faces gaunt and unrecognizable, as if life itself had been drained from them. Their eyes, once human, were now dull and lifeless, with an unsettling glow that only grew more pronounced in the darkening twilight. They were speaking in low voices, but their words were jumbled, incoherent. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was something deeper, something unnatural. Elena's pulse quickened. "They're not right," Ray whispered from behind her. Those people are changed. Just like the things we've been fighting." Elena's lips parted as she processed the grim reality. "Not just changed," she muttered, "controlled. Look at them. They're being used." A strange figure at the center of the group caught her eye. It was a man, tall and imposing, his features shadowed by the dim light. His movements were fluid, like he was orchestrating everything around him. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curled on his lips as he addressed the group. He spoke in a language that wasn't quite a language, more like a series of low, guttural sounds. The group around him nodded, their heads jerking in unison, as if they were responding to a command. "Is that their leader?" Jonas murmured, his voice barely audible. Elena nodded slowly. "He's not human anymore. He's controlling them. And I'm sure he has something to do with the Hollow." The leader lifted his hand, and the group immediately fell silent. It was a chilling sight, these once human beings, now puppets in the hands of something darker. As the figure turned to walk toward a nearby structure, an abandoned building that had been repurposed into some kind of makeshift base, Elena's group moved closer, staying hidden in the shadows. The man didn't notice them. He was too focused on his puppets. "We need to get inside that building," Elena whispered, her voice urgent. "We need answers." Jonas gave her a sharp look. "You think it's safe?" "Safe or not, we have to know what's really going on here," Elena replied, her jaw set with determination. "If these people are being controlled, we need to find out why." and if they're part of whatever's going on in the hollow, we need to take them down. The group crept forward, their eyes trained on the building. It was a crumbling structure, once a factory or a warehouse perhaps, but now it looked like a twisted fortress, a home for the hollowed-out remnants of humanity. The broken windows were covered with metal bars, and the door was made of thick steel, rusted but still sturdy. Elena reached the door first, signaling for the others to stop. She crouched low and inspected the entrance. There were no guards, no obvious traps. But that didn't mean they were safe. It was far too quiet. Ray pulled out a small crowbar from her backpack and began working on the rusted lock. The sound of metal scraping against metal was deafening in the silence of the night, but they didn't have time to be careful. The leader and his followers were still inside the building, and it wouldn't be long before they discovered that Elena's group was close. With a soft click, the door creaked open, revealing the dim, dank interior. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and rot, but it was also filled with the unmistakable scent of something more, chemicals. Elena's stomach churned as she stepped inside, followed by the others. The inside of the building was a mess of makeshift beds, piles of supplies, and a strange, eerie calm that didn't match the chaos of the world outside. It was almost like the place had been carefully organized to keep the inhabitants in a state of stasis, no hope of escape, no real plan for survival. "This place is a prison," Dev muttered under his breath as he surveyed the room. His voice trembled slightly. "But for who?" Elena's gaze swept across the room, and then she froze. In the far corner, behind a set of locked cages, were more figures, mutants. But these mutants weren't like the ones they had seen outside. They were different, cleaner, more refined. Their eyes were empty, like the others, but there was something almost human about them. "They're being experimented on," Ray whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "These people are turning others into them." Elena's blood ran cold. The leader had control over the mutants, but they weren't born this way. They were made. They had stumbled upon something much darker than they had anticipated, a breeding ground for horrors beyond imagination. The atmosphere in the abandoned building grew colder with every step. Elena's breath came in shallow gasps, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The cages in the corner were the most disturbing sight, mutants, but not the kind they'd faced before. These creatures were different. Their skin, though mottled and bruised, still held some trace of humanity, like they were in the process of being transformed into something worse. Something controlled. "What are they doing to them?" Ray's voice trembled with disgust. Elena didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. The truth was far more terrifying than anything she'd anticipated. These weren't just survivors trying to get by. These people, the leader and his followers, were conducting experiments, altering the very essence of life itself. Jonas stepped forward, his eyes fixed on one of the mutants. "They're not just turning into these things. They're being bred like them." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The mutants weren't random, mindless killers. They were part of a larger, horrifying plan. A plan to create a new breed of humanity, one that would obey and serve, with no thought of rebellion or escape. A new world where the dead ruled, and the living were nothing but tools in the hands of the powerful. "Where are the others?" Dev asked, his voice low as he eyed the cages with increasing wariness. "There must be more people here." Elena's mind raced. There was no time to waste. They couldn't afford to stay here any longer. Not with these abominations so close. She motioned for the others to follow her as she moved deeper into the building, her eyes constantly shifting from side to side. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. "We need to find the leader. If we can confront him, we can end this. But we need to know what's going on here. We need answers." Jonas nodded, his hand tight on the rifle's grip. "I'm with you. But if this guy's as dangerous as I think, we can't just walk up to him." Ray shook her head. "We need to be smart about this. We can't afford another fight right now. Not with what we've seen." Elena stopped in her tracks as a low sound echoed from the back of the room. It was a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable hiss of breath, too wet and too labored to be human. Do you hear that? Ray whispered, her face pale with fear. Elena nodded, motioning for everyone to stay low. She crept toward the source of the noise, her heart pounding in her chest. The others followed suit, their movements swift and silent. The sound grew louder as they approached an open doorway at the back of the building. It was shrouded in darkness, but Elena could make out the faint outline of a figure, a shadow. It was the leader. He stood facing a large table, his hands moving over a series of strange, gleaming devices, each one connected to wires and tubes that snaked across the floor. The devices hummed with energy, their faint glow casting an eerie light on his face. His eyes were cold, empty, but there was an intelligence in them that sent a chill down Elena's spine. He was too focused on his work to notice them. This was their chance. Elena motioned for the others to stay quiet. She moved forward, closer to the leader, her breath held in anticipation. They needed to know what he was doing, why he was turning people into these mutants, and why they were keeping them alive. But just as she was about to get closer, a voice cut through the silence. It wasn't the leader's. "I know you're there." The voice was smooth, calm, almost knowing. Elena froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned toward the voice, but there was no one in sight. "You're wondering about them," the voice continued, a slight chuckle following. "The mutants. The ones in the cages. You want to know what we're doing?" Elena's blood ran cold. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rise. This wasn't just some coincidence. The leader had known they were here from the start. He'd been watching them. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, echoing in the walls of the building. "It's not what you think. It's more than just survival. It's evolution. The world is changing. It has to. You've seen the chaos outside, those things, the flesh eaters, they're not the end. They're just the beginning." The leader's voice was close now, and Elena spun around to see him standing just behind her, his figure emerging from the shadows. He was tall, imposing, with a presence that demanded attention. His eyes locked onto hers, the eerie glow in them sending a wave of cold dread through her. "You're too late," he said softly. "The future has already been decided." Elena's pulse raced. She had no idea what he meant by that, but one thing was clear, the leader wasn't just some survivor. He wasn't even human anymore. He was something else entirely. "Why?" Elena demanded, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Why are you doing this?" The leader smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph, it was something more unsettling. "To make the world better," he said simply. "To rid it of weakness. To create a new order. The infected ones, the mutants, they're not the problem. They're the solution." And in that moment, Elena understood the terrifying truth. The Hollow wasn't a sanctuary, it was a breeding ground for a new race of monsters. And she and her team were the last obstacle standing in their way. The leader's chilling words echoed in Elena's mind, making her stomach twist with dread. The solution. His twisted vision for the world wasn't just about survival, it was about reshaping humanity into something worse, something subhuman, all under his control. The truth of the Hollow's existence and its sickening experiments flooded her thoughts. "Stop," Elena said, her voice strained with urgency. "You're insane. You think turning people into those things is the answer?" The leader's smile didn't falter. His glowing eyes watched her with an eerie calm, as if the idea of questioning him was beneath her. "Insane," he mused. "No. I'm beyond that. I've seen what happens when the weak are allowed to lead. It's chaos. You can't save them. You can't save yourselves." He raised his hand, and in an instant, several of his followers, those who had once been human, now twisted into grotesque versions of themselves, moved toward Elena's group. Their eyes were dull, but there was an unnatural focus behind their empty gazes. They were more than just zombies, they were puppets, and the leader was their master. "Get back!" Jonas shouted, lifting his rifle as the mutants advanced. "We're not going down without a fight." The mutants lunged, but Elena's group was ready. Jonas fired the first shot, sending one of the mutants crashing to the ground with a guttural scream. But there was no stopping the others. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs jerking like marionettes on strings. The air was thick with the tension of battle as Elena raised her weapon, her finger tight on the trigger. She barely had time to react before one of the mutants barreled toward her. With a quick sidestep, she narrowly avoided the monster's grasp, the putrid stench of its decaying skin filling her nostrils. She jabbed her weapon into its side and pulled the trigger, sending the creature to the floor with a brutal thud. But more were coming. More were already in motion, and they were relentless. Dev fought back-to-back with Ray, both of them fiercely pushing against the mutant onslaught. Ray swung a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe, catching one mutant in the face with a sickening crack. It stumbled back, disoriented, but then lunged forward again. The survivors were battling for their lives, but every blow they struck seemed to push them back further into the darkness of the building. The leader stood unmoving, watching the chaos unfold with a look of detached amusement. He didn't even flinch as his mutants were gunned down or knocked back. It was as if they were nothing more than pawns in a game that had already been decided. "You see," the leader called out over the sound of the struggle. "This is the inevitable future. You're fighting a losing battle. The mutants are evolving, becoming stronger, faster. The more you resist, the more you reveal your weakness." Elena's pulse raced as she kept her focus, dodging another attack. She didn't have time to think about his words. The only thing that mattered now was surviving long enough to stop him. But the weight of what he said lingered in her mind, gnawing at her. How could they win this? With a flash of insight, Elena's eyes darted around the room. There was a chance, a slim one, but it was their only shot. The leader might have control over the mutants, but he wasn't invincible. There had to be something in this place that could break his hold on them, something that would stop this madness. "Elena!" Jonas called out, his voice hoarse with exertion. "We need a way to stop him. What do we do?" She scanned the room quickly, and then she saw it. In the far corner, next to a set of large power cables, was a large control panel, a series of buttons and levers that must have been connected to the experiments, to the very machines that had been altering the mutants. If she could shut it down, maybe the leader's control would falter. Elena didn't hesitate. "Ray, Jonas, cover me," she shouted. Before they could respond, she bolted toward the control panel, dodging another mutant that lunged for her. Her heart hammered in her chest, each step feeling like an eternity. She reached the panel and quickly assessed the controls. There were wires everywhere, the lights flashing ominously, and a sickening hum vibrating through the walls. But there was one button that caught her eye, the emergency shutoff. If she could disable the system, it might sever the leader's connection to the mutants. With shaking hands, Elena slammed her palm onto the button, the light on the panel flickering as a loud, shrieking alarm sounded throughout the building. The mutants froze, their movements jerky and disoriented as the leader's control over them was severed. For a moment, the room was eerily still. Then, chaos erupted. The mutants screamed in pain, their bodies contorting as if they were fighting against an invisible force. They clawed at their own skin, their faces twisting in agony. It was a horrific sight, but Elena knew it was their only chance. The leader's face twisted into a snarl as he realized what was happening. "No," he yelled, taking a step toward Elena. "You fools! You don't understand what you've done." But it was too late. Without his control, the mutants were in turmoil. They turned on him, the one person who had held power over them. In a frenzy, they tore at his clothes, their movements desperate and violent. Elena's group seized the opportunity. Ray and Jonas fought back the remaining mutants, while Dev covered their retreat. Elena stood frozen, watching the horrific scene unfold. The leader's plans were unraveling, and with it, his twisted vision for the future. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The building trembled as the last of the mutants turned on the leader, their claws raking through his body with terrifying efficiency. Elena watched in a mix of horror and disbelief as the man who had once been the mastermind of their torment was consumed by his own creations. His screams echoed through the chamber, but it was a futile cry. He had underestimated his own monsters, and now they were taking their revenge. Elena snapped herself out of her stupor. She couldn't afford to stand there, paralyzed by the gruesome spectacle unfolding before her. She glanced at Jonas, Ray, and Dev, each one locked in a brutal battle with the remaining mutants, but they were winning. The odds had shifted. Now was their chance to escape. "Come on. We need to move," Elena shouted, her voice tight with urgency. Jonas and Ray nodded, cutting down the last few mutants with swift, precise strikes. Dev gave a final, brutal shove to the last attacker and then turned to follow the group. With the leader's power over the mutants broken, they were no longer mindless pawns. They were wild, unpredictable, and in agony, but their focus was no longer on Elena's team. The situation had changed. The building was shaking more violently now. Elena could feel the walls vibrating beneath her feet, the ominous sound of groaning metal reverberating through the space. She didn't need to be a genius to know that the destruction they had caused wasn't just the mutants fighting back, it was the building itself, collapsing under the strain of the experiment gone wrong. It was falling apart, and fast. "Elena, move," Dev called, his voice breaking through the chaos. "We need to get out of here, now." With no time to waste, Elena grabbed Ray's arm, and the group made a run for the exit, darting through the wreckage-strewn hallways. The alarms continued to blare, the air growing thick with dust and smoke. As they ran, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the building, shaking the very ground beneath them. They reached the door leading to the outside, but it was locked, an electronic security system blocking their escape. Elena cursed under her breath as she yanked on the handle, but it was no use. They were trapped in the building as it fell apart around them. "I can hack it," Jonas said quickly, his fingers flying over the controls on his portable device. "Just give me a second." Behind them, a deafening crash echoed as a wall collapsed, sending debris tumbling into the hallway. The mutants, those still alive, were either writhing in pain or turned on each other in mindless desperation. The group didn't wait to see which. The building was collapsing, and there was no time left to waste. Jonas worked fast, muttering under his breath as the security system buzzed in protest. Elena could hear the crackling of fire growing closer, the heavy sound of flames licking at the walls. "Hurry!" Ray urged, her hand on the wall as she leaned forward, clearly prepared to push forward when the door gave way. With a final, decisive press of a button, Jonas grinned. "Done. Let's go." The door swung open, revealing the bright, harsh light of day outside. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of burning metal and smoke. It was a moment of freedom, but there was no time to savor it. The entire building was coming down, and they had mere seconds before it collapsed entirely. "Go!" Elena shouted, motioning for the others to follow her. They sprinted out into the open, heartbeats racing, as they cleared the building just as it collapsed behind them. The ground shook violently beneath their feet as the structure crumbled into a heap of twisted metal and rubble. Elena risked a glance back, her heart pounding in her chest. The flames engulfed the wreckage, consuming everything in its path. They didn't stop running. The world outside was still a wasteland, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Elena allowed herself to breathe. The nightmare inside the hollow was over, but it had come at a terrible price. The leader's twisted vision had died with him, but so had any hope of finding an easy answer to this apocalypse. There were no quick fixes, no neat solutions. The road ahead would be long and dangerous. But for now, they had survived. "Are we safe?" Dev asked, his voice low as they slowed to a stop in the barren landscape. Elena hesitated, staring out at the endless horizon. She could hear the distant growls of the undead, the unmistakable shuffle of their decayed bodies moving across the land. The world outside was still broken, still full of terror. But as long as they kept moving, as long as they stayed together, there was a chance they could survive. A chance to rebuild, if not the world, at least their own lives. "For now," Elena said softly, her eyes hardening with resolve. "For now, we survive." And with that, the group set off, walking away from the ruins of the hollow and toward an uncertain future. Whatever lay beyond the barricades, they would face it together. This concludes the story. Beyond the Barricades Lies Hope, or something worse than anyone imagined. Would you like to explore another story or concept?